Hello, my name is Adrienne Atkinson. Welcome to my channel. I am an indoor hydroponic gardener. I grow 80% of the produce that I eat here in my 2-bedroom apartment without a balcony. And in this video, I am going to take you from plant all the way to table. And I will do that for a variety of my favorite recipes. So without any further ado, let's get started. The first recipe of this series is going to be shrimp with winter greens. And the winter green that we're going to do today is kale. Now, this recipe comes from one of my favorite recipe books, and it's an old one. It's called Skinny Dinners. But I've done this recipe several times, and I truly enjoy it. And because I grow the produce that's called for in the recipe, it makes it even more enjoyable. So the first thing that I'll do is I'm going to take frozen shrimp and I put them in the refrigerator and let them thaw. So I take them out of the refrigerator and rinse them quite well and dry them with a paper towel. Now that the shrimp are ready, I'm going to get the garlic also. Now, I don't grow garlic and I don't even want to cut up fresh garlic. So I tend to buy my garlic in the jar pre-cut, and I go through it fairly rapidly because most of the recipes call for garlic. So in the skillet, I'm going to spray it with a little avocado oil, just a tiny bit, not much because the shrimp have a lot of water, but I don't want them to hit the hot skillet without any oil. So just a tiny bit of avocado oil spray, and I'll put the shrimp and about a tablespoon of diced garlic into the pot. And I will let that saute and cook until the shrimp um, are no longer transparent or translucent, until they are a little solid looking. And while that's cooking, I am going to prepare the kale. Now, this recipe calls for kale. The ingredients from my garden will be kale, oregano, fresh basil, and cherry tomatoes. So those are the ingredients the produce that I'll be pulling from my hydroponic gardens. And the kale is growing in my garden studio, which is in my kitchen, part of my kitchen garden. And I can just take this fresh kale and cook with it today. I don't have to worry about pesticides, what farm it came from, were there steer or cows or other animals that used the land prior to growing the plants. None of those worries by growing my own. So part of it is the convenience of having it right in the kitchen. There's a little work there, but also the peace of mind and having very fresh produce at its peak of its nutrient content, with the nutrient content at its peak. So this recipe calls for the kale. I'm just going to snip the kale, and I would call this baby kale. The level that it's grown to, you have your sprouts, and then you let it grow a little bit more, and it's considered baby. And then you let the plant grow more, it would be considered mature. I would call this kale at the baby kale stage, because this particular variety of kale can grow a lot larger. I've seen it larger in the stores, but I really like it at this stage because it is so tender. I don't really have to worry about the vein that goes through it, even though sometimes I'll cut it out. I also grow collard greens, and sometimes I will snip the vein out. But with the kale in the baby stage, it's usually not a problem, and it tastes delicious. So I'll get the kale ready, and I will, once the shrimp is done, I'll put the shrimp aside, take it from the skillet, set it aside. Little black ground pepper on it also. And you can salt, pepper to taste, but at this point, you probably don't need any salt because the shrimp have their own natural salt flavor, or savor flavor, I should say. So I put the shrimp aside, and then I put the kale in the skillet, in the hot skillet. Let the skillet get hot again because I actually waited a little bit. But I'll let the skillet get hot again, put the kale in, cover it up, and let it reduce in the a few little drippings left behind from the shrimp and the garlic. Now, while the kale is getting ready, I'm going to cut my cherry tomatoes in half, and I'm going to add to the cherry tomatoes some oregano, fresh oregano, and I have a fresh oregano plant growing in a mason jar that I keep on the counter in my kitchen. And it's just a matter of snipping off the oregano leaves, the stem, and then you can usually just pull it and the leaves will come out if it's a strong stem. And if it's not a strong stem, you can just cut it up and let it go into your dish. So I will put the fresh oregano there, also basil. I grow my basil, and what happens is the basil grows so fast that it goes into the light fairly quickly. So I'm always taking cuttings from it and sitting them in a separate jar, well, actually a cup, just a cup with water in it, on the shelf in the kitchen. So I use that basil first before I go and get some more basil that's grown into the light. So there's basil that I'm going to cut up, and I'm going to put that there with the tomatoes. I don't use a lot of onion. I guess you could use onion in this dish, but with the garlic, I think I'm pretty much covered. So once the kale has reduced a bit, I'll remove the kale from the pot. I'll put the tomatoes in with their seasonings, and let the tomatoes cook down a little bit so that the moisture is pooling from the tomatoes. And after they've cooked down just a little bit, I'm going to add of some jar tomato sauce, whichever your favorite is. This happens to be my favorite, so I'll just add two tablespoons, and that measure that I have is a 2 tablespoon measure. So actually, I think I used 4 tablespoons. Um, so because I did it twice, so 4 tablespoons of the tomato sauce, and mix that in with the fresh tomatoes and fresh basil and fresh oregano, and salt, pepper to taste once again. And then you're ready to combine the ingredients. So I'll combine the ingredients, the kale, the shrimp, in with the tomato mixture, and it is absolutely wonderful. However, the recipe also calls for olives. So Italian olives, I will put a few of those in there at this point because they don't need to be cooked. So everything is pretty much cooked at this point, and I'll just add the olives, and then I will plate the food. Um, so the dish goes over a pasta. I prefer angel hair pasta, but you can use any pasta that you like. And so I will plate the dish over pasta, and then I will I'll top it with a little Parmesan cheese. Now, in case you're wondering about I showed you the kale, the farming of the kale, how I harvest the kale. But the tomatoes, I keep tomatoes at different stages of growth in my hydroponic apartment or hydroponic garden and farm. I have tomatoes at one stage of growth in my kitchen garden. I usually like those to be ripe, but right now those are just in the flowering stage. And then back in the farm, in my Gardyn 330, my farm garden, I have tomatoes. I'll show you the tomatoes I have. Some are ripening. They're in various stages of production. Some are ripening up right now. They're turning red. Others are green. And then I also have flowers. So I try to keep the tomatoes in the different states that they grow in. And then I also have two tomato plants that are seeds that haven't sprouted yet. And when those sprout, they're two pods. And when those two pods sprout, they will probably give me an additional four. Each pod will probably have probably four tomato plants in it. So I could end up with an additional eight plants or so, because what happens is in that one pod, you're going to get several seedlings. And I never destroy those seedlings. I always open the pod and pull the seedlings out and start different tomato plants. So that's a subject for another video. And I'm working on that video right now where I'm talking about succession planning, how I plant in succession so that I always have the produce that I love on hand. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this recipe. And until the next plant to table? Plant to table. Yes. I'll see you again in the next video. Bye for now.